skill that before. I'm really excited about this actually. Pegasus is
okay. So kind of pernicious thing about this. Now this is gonna be it's probably gonna be my final video on Nerve Gorilla and anything related to Nerve Gorilla. It's important to share this out though. Everybody needs to see this. This guy needs to get fucking shut down. But I don't know why I never mentioned this to him before. I never brought it up before. You know, he just claimed to me yesterday that there's no program that allows somebody to use your camera or your microphone. And of course he throws in the as an option wording. He throws that wording in there as an option. Well, of course they don't give it as an option. That would be a violation of your privacy. Now, there is something that allows the user to totally take over another person's device without their knowledge or awareness at all, without them even being aware that it's happening. They can access their microphone, their camera. They can pretty much do anything. They can take over the fucking person's device, and they won't even know that it happened. And even if they're looking for it, it's hard to find. Like I said, I think it's on my phone. I can't find it. I don't know how to get into that. I need somebody who can, somebody who's a professional in this field to go over my device. Even then, it's not even likely that they're going to be able to determine that I had Pegasus on my phone or not. But that's why Pegasus is such a threat. Now, Pegasus is supposed to be, very, very expensive and only used by governments. Well, what do you know? By governments to do, spying, like spying on people's devices. They can intercept your messages. They can do all of this stuff. Pegasus does it all, okay? But it's used by governments. Now, this is a video. This explains it in detail by somebody who knows what they're talking about. They're not trying to scam you, even though they have a book for sale on Amazon, okay? Nerve Gorilla. And Nerve Gorilla, I would love to hear you dispute any of the information that's in this video. We're going to play this video for everybody. Watch, learn something, take notes, share it as much as possible, and enjoy.
Something that a lot of people have asked for, but I believe you've got a course coming up with you talk about Android hacking or demonstrate Android hacking, and you've actually got the software, right?
So before I got a few slides I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about it from a technical aspect. Don't want to get too technical, but I don't want to, we can get bogged down in the weeds here, but I want to talk a little bit about what's going on here with this particular piece of malware.
It's interesting. I just read that is it Armenia? They've just at the time of this recording happened yesterday, that they found it in like a war zone. So it's like you said, it's getting used all over the place, and it's going on people who are civilians. So it's like you say, getting abused a lot, it seems.
Yeah, it's being abused in many countries, Armenia, as you mentioned, and a number of other places. It's been used in Azerbaijan, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Mexico. You can just keep on going on with the list. It was first used in Mexico, and it was brought in by the government in Mexico to try to spy on the drug cartels. And eventually it got into the hands of the drug cartels. And the drug cartels began to use it against other people, journalists, what have you. It was been used in Mexico. I'm just picking on Mexico here, but Mexico, it was actually used to spy on political opponents. The current president of Mexico, López Obrador, was actually, his family and his people were spied on by the opposition, okay, when he was running for office in 2018 using Pegasus. So, and there's the Khashoggi case in Saudi Arabia where it was used to spy on Jamal Khashoggi, and eventually it ended up leading to his death and dismemberment in Turkey. There's a number of journalists and human rights activists who've been spied on by it, and some have lost their lives. So this goes beyond cybersecurity. This goes into privacy rights and human rights. And as a global community, I think it's something that we need to talk about and address. And so from here, what we want to do is to talk a little bit about what it does, how it works. I think as a global community, we have to think about, how do we address this? Is this legitimate? And people may not be aware, but there is a industry of people who produce malware, zero-day malware, that is sold to governments. All right, and there's a number of these companies out there. This is legal hacking. All right, as long as you only sell it to the government. And as long as it's sold to the government, it's legal, of course, because they make the rules. They make the laws, so it's legal. And they can use it any way that they want. So if you'll allow me, I'd like to share my screen. Okay, I just put together a few slides to discuss Pegasus. Pegasus, developed by the NSO group, can, once it infects a phone, it can, extract SMS messages, other messaging apps, give geolocation, record video, record audio, pull the contacts out of your phone. And, this is really pernicious in that once it's on somebody's phone, it can pull all of the contacts out of their phone and find out all the people that they're talking to or messaging. And that could be really dangerous, especially if you're not in the good graces of your government, like some of the more oppressive governments around the world. It comes in through a variety of actions, through the browser, through SMS messages. The first thing that people may not be aware of, hopefully you are, is that there are these companies around the world who develop 0 days. Right? And it's legal and legitimate, and they've been doing it. It's an industry that's been around for a while. And what they do is they simply try to find vulnerabilities in phones and browsers and operating systems and applications, and then they sell them. VuPen has been around for quite a while. They're out of France. NSO, the one we're talking about today, is in Israel. Hacking Team was a big deal until they got hacked in 2015. VuPen has opened up a service called Zeroday, where it's kind of like a bug bounty program. They're buying 0 days that they'll resell. So they're kind of like a broker of 0 days. And then there's the Equation Group in the US that developed Eternal Blue and probably developed Stuxnet as well, the big SCADA attack against Iran in 2010. So these are some of the big players. There's many, many players in this field. In many cases, they'll sell 0 days for millions of dollars to governments. All right.
Sorry, some of the audience might not know. So 0 day means like with the it's a vulnerability that the developers don't know about, right?
Yeah, it's a 0 day means that it's never been seen. So when it comes out, it's never been seen. So therefore, it's largely undetectable by any of our security devices. So for instance, antivirus, basically, antivirus has evolved, but in the very beginning, what it was is simply a set of signatures of malware. So it had signatures of malware, and it could only detect what it knew about. So if it's never seen a malware, it doesn't have a signature, and therefore can't detect it. In recent years, AV's gotten a little more sophisticated and can detect behavior, what looks like malicious behavior. So a 0 day is a brand new exploit that hasn't been seen yet. And as such, it hasn't been patched, and there aren't any ways of detecting it. Right? So without getting into a lot of detail, here's the original Pegasus. All right. So stage one was a delivery in a WebKit vulnerability. It exploited CVE 2016, so it gives you an idea what time frame we're talking about here. All right. It comes down through an initial URL. So what it does is that it comes down through a web server. The person clicks on a link. Now, probably all of you have gotten malicious link. I get them every day. Maybe it's just me, but
Yeah.
I get malicious.
No, I think a lot. I think we do. A lot of us do. Sorry, go
Yeah.
on.
So you get these text messages, right? SMS messages.
Yeah.
And it's always, well, I can look at my phone right now and probably see a bunch of them, but it's always some offering. It's either you've won something, the typical spam phishing, but now they're SMS messages. And so this is where Pegasus began, okay, as a single click. And if you clicked on that message, you then had malware downloaded to your phone, and it exploited a vulnerability in the WebKit in the Safari browser on the iPhone. All right. The next stage, of course, was to jailbreak it. The stage was downloaded from the first stage code based upon the device. It's downloaded as an obfuscated and encrypted package. So what it's doing is that to get past any type of security device, such as AV, it's obfuscated, which means that the code has been changed in a way that it makes it more difficult to recognize what it actually is. And of course, then it's encrypted. So obfuscated means hard to see, how to detect. Okay. Each package is encrypted with unique keys at each download. So each package is encrypted with unique keys, making traditional network-based controls ineffective. It contains code that's needed to exploit the iOS kernel. Right? So one of the things that this needs to do is it has to find the kernel within memory. So that's what's happening at this stage. It has to find the kernel within the memory to be able to run its exploit. And then in the final stage, it contains espionage software, daemons, and other processes that are used after the device has been jailbroken. And then once that espionage software is put on the phone, they're basically, what they're doing here is that they're placing a process. They're embedding a process that can intercept text messages, your email messages, before they leave the phone. And then they send those out back through a chain of command and control servers that are based around the world. All right. So they're sending out your text messages, and it's not necessarily a continuous process. The controller can request the messages periodically. All right. The other kind of pernicious thing about this software is that it can be removed remotely, so that if they believe that the user has detected Pegasus, they can just push a button and basically remove it from the machine, from the phone. And so it's really, really hard for people to be able to detect it, or to even get copies of it, because as soon as it's detected, or anything that indicates that it's being detected, or if it's on the wrong kind of device, it automatically deletes itself. So this is the original. This was a single click. So it required that the user clicked on an SMS message to be able to exploit it. In many cases, they were not able to get the target to click on the link. And so that raised problems for them. You and I probably never click on those links that are sent to us from people we don't know. And this is the risk that if you go ahead and you click, and it's not just Pegasus, because there's a lot of software out there, a lot of malware, that if you click on it, they can download malware to your phone, and then you've lost control and privacy of your phone. And our phone has become, a reservoir for our entire life. So if somebody controls your phone, they have your whole life. They have all your contacts, all your messages. They can turn on your camera, your mic, and listen in to what you're doing. And this is what governments have been doing and using this for. and sometimes against people who, they probably should not be using. Yes, it has been used to stop some terrorist attacks. Yes, it has been done for law enforcement, but it's been abused as well against opponents of the governments, of human rights activists, of journalists. There's been a number of journalists who've been killed as a result of the information that has been extracted from their phones by their governments, including Khashoggi, who was a journalist in the United States, who was a Saudi citizen, living in the United States, writing for the Washington Post, who was then killed in Turkey and dismembered in Turkey. In some cases, they couldn't get the user to click on a link. So what they did next is something that I've talked about earlier, and that is using a femtocell. We talked a little bit about this in terms of Mr. Robot. So this is kind of real world now. Mr. Robot's
That's interesting.
a TV show, and so, but one of the
I'll link that video below. Sorry, go on.
Right. So the femtocell, if you're not familiar with it, is simply a local mobile cell tower. Right? So they are legal, and they're legal because some people are so distant from a cell tower, they don't have good reception. So the companies, in this case, it's Verizon, and this is the largest carrier in the United States, they sell these, okay, to help people who don't have good access to a cell tower, and it collects essentially the cell signal. It becomes a local, near, proximate cell tower, okay, usually within a home or an office, and then sends a cell signal through the internet, all right, into the cell network. And so this is what they were using in some countries to be able to put Pegasus malware onto the people's phones. When they couldn't get them to click, they then would able to get them to connect to a femtocell, and we have a class on building a femtocell coming up in September, I think. So keep that in mind. Or a Stingray, okay? This is a Stingray. And these are also legal, but only legal in the hands of law enforcement. So this is what many countries around the world use to spy on their citizens. What it is it's a mobile. It's a mobile cell tower, so they can put it in a van, in a truck, what have you, and move it any place. And then once again, your cell phone will connect to the closest cell tower. Your phone, so that if there's a van parked in your neighborhood, your phone will connect to that cell tower, in which case then the person who owns that cell tower can see all of your network traffic as well as put things into your network traffic. So in the case of Pegasus, they use either a femtocell or a Stingray to be able to put malware into the target's phone when they couldn't get them to click on a link. And you can see this is one of the commercial, and there's a price list down below here. You can see what they cost for. This one's $157,000, but supposedly you can only buy it if you're law enforcement or government. But these are widely used by governments to be able to spy on their citizens, used by law enforcement to be able to pick up traffic. In the United States, supposedly you need a search warrant to be able to use one against a target. All right. So these have been used when they couldn't get people to click on a link. All right. So even if you don't, the point I'm trying to make here is that even if you don't click on the link, you could still be at risk of being affected with Pegasus. This is still a one-click exploit. All right. But if they can connect to your cell phone with either a femtocell or a Stingray, once the traffic is going through their device, they can go ahead and send back to your phone the malware. Okay, so in essence,
wow.
it's ZeroClick, but it requires that they actually know where you are and get in physical
That's very hard.
proximity to you, and it's a little bit more expensive for them, more work for them. Now, in 2021, they developed a ZeroClick exploit. All right, and this one was probably the most troublesome. All right, in that it required no interaction by the end user. It sent what it looked like a GIF image, okay, to the user's phone, to the iMessage, and basically it crashed this particular function right here, the JBig2 stream, all right, and then installed the malware in that way. And so this is the one that has probably caused the most problems in recent years, is that this is a ZeroClick. You had nothing, you have no idea that it's been installed on your phone, and there's no indication that's on the phone. You've got somebody sent you a message, an iMessage, and now they've taken over your phone. These are all been developed by NSO Group. This is Pegasus, right? And as probably should say is that Pegasus is not a piece of malware. It's multiple pieces of malware, and that NSO keeps on evolving it and keeps on changing to adapt to the environment. So they come up with an exploit. Apple then patches it. They come up with a new exploit. Okay, Apple patches it. And so we're in this constant chess game of trying to keep this off our phones. And so it's really opens up, some significant questions about privacy and human rights in the world. I'm not sure that if you want to address those kinds of issues, but this is something that is important, thinking about hacking and malware, and that, malware and hacking sometimes, was, well, for instance, ransomware was a financial issue, all right? Now, this is where we're getting into privacy issues, right? And this can be very pernicious, and it can make us all a little paranoid, and in essence, it can also make us concerned enough that we maybe don't talk in our messages on the phone in ways that we would if we felt that our messages were private. So we end up being paranoid and maybe a little bit self-censoring of what we do on our phones because of the presence. So this has a dramatic effect upon society at large, and not just a loss of some financial resources.
Occupy the Web, iOS, well, people may have believed, it was often people thought that it's more secure than Android. Pegasus blows that out of the water, right? Because Pegasus was specifically for iOS, right?
Well, I would say that iOS is still more secure than Android, but this piece of malware was designed just initially for iOS and then was ported over to Android. Android has a lot of vulnerabilities. A lot of people who are concerned about privacy, people who are in the human rights field, people who are in journalism, usually are using an iPhone because they feel like it's more secure. But the Pegasus is targeted just to those type of people, right? There's lots of other malware that governments can use and hackers can use for the Android operating system, which, by the way, Android is over like 80% of the global market for operating systems on phones. A lot of people, I hear people say, well, the world's 50% Apple and 50% Android. No. It's 80,
not at all. No.
It's 82% of Android and 18% iOS and other things, right? So getting inside of an Android phone is a little bit easier than getting inside of an Apple phone. and that's why NSO can sell these. NSO sells, it makes hundreds of millions of dollars selling this. All right, they charge about $25,000 per target. All right, so if a government wants to buy, 1,000 license, right, it's going to cost them, what is that, $25 million, right? So, and governments are willing to pay it, and they do.
Oh, yeah.
And so this has caused a lot of problems around the world, and it continues to cause a lot of problems around the world. And it's something that we need to be, your viewership needs to be aware of, and everybody who has a phone should be aware that this is something that's out there, and it's being exploited daily on our phones.
I think the question is always, what can we do, like a normal person?
Well,
Is it just keep it up to date? I know Apple released lockdown mode, which is something that's supposedly supposed to stop this kind of thing. But like you say, they keep developing new exploits.
right. Well, as far as what we can do, first of all, never click on a link from anybody you don't know. and sometimes that's hard to do, because one of the ways to get people to click on links is to take over somebody else's phone, okay, and send out links from their phone in their contact list, so it looks like it's coming from somebody you know. Right? And then you go, and that's what happened in a number of these journalists, is that they were sent out, from somebody's phone who got compromised, and then they sent out more of the links, SMS messages, text messages, to other people, and got all of their friends got infected, and all their contacts got infected as well. So the first thing to do is probably to not click on any links on SMS in general. Probably is the best thing you can do. But that doesn't solve the problem of the ZeroClick exploits that are out there. And I think we all have to, couple things we can do is that, one, we have to be more demanding of our developers, and that in this case it's Apple and Google, to be more responsible to develop safe and secure software. Right? If the software that they developed was secure, this wouldn't be possible. Now, it's pretty hard to put out software that has no vulnerabilities in it, but these are both very, very large corporations with billions of dollars, and I think we need to demand that of them, that they make their operating systems and their applications, because this isn't just the operating system. This is a kind of a linked exploit between the application and the operating system. In this case here, this Zeroday that was a ZeroClick, was a flaw in the way that it handled. It sends it out as a GIF, but it's really a JPEG-2 image, and then it gets processed by this particular function here, and it overflows it, causes it to crash, installs its own software in its place, and the game's over at that point.
I think the cynic in me and other people might say the same thing. It's governments are not enforcing it because they want this. It's that's just a cynical take on it.
Yeah, I think that's true. Although the U.S. government has banned NSO products now. Okay, so but that may be just that they may still be using it internally, but that's externally what they're saying is that they have a ban on NSO products. And then we have a lot.
The cynic in me says they're getting the NSA version. Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's the NSO version is not. So they're getting the same thing from somebody somebody else, whether it be VuPen or Hacking Team or what have you. So yeah, they've banned NSO products. Interesting about NSO is that whenever NSO sells any software to a government, they have to have the Israeli Department of Defense approval. So when they're selling it to these governments and they're abusing it, there is a certain level of responsibility that goes back to the Israeli Department of Defense because they're approving the sale. And if you're approving the sale to a country that has a terrible human rights record and is abusing it and you're not doing anything about it, then there's a certain amount of responsibility here. For instance, in Morocco, where it's been used against anybody who's opposed to the king in Morocco, and it has ended up with many people in prison and being murdered by the king in Morocco, and a number of other places as well. Just picking on Morocco, but it's been used in Jordan, Kazakhstan, Iraq, Hungary, India. I mean, you can just make a list, and even in France. I mean, France. It was used against Macron, the president of France. His phone was hacked with Pegasus, and so somebody was listening in, and it's suspected that it was the Moroccan authorities who were listening in on Macron's conversations. And so, what are these players, the governments of the world, going to do? I mean, if it's being used against your government, for instance, in Mexico, it was used against Lopez Obrador, yet it's still actively being used by the Mexican government as best as we can tell. And it's been the early versions, the version that had the one click, found its way into the hands of the drug cartels, all right? And they were using it against their opponents, including the government and including journalists who might have something negative to say about them. So it's problematic, and it's something that, as a global community, we have to start thinking about is how do we handle this? Is a new world that we're talking about here. How do we handle this? Do we just allow this to take place? Is there no limits on this? When you're talking about intrusion upon privacy, this raises all new issues for all of us. I mean, we've had malware and viruses around for 30, 40, 50 years, right? I guess the first ones were 1980s or thereabouts. But now we're talking about a loss of privacy, and I think privacy, people may disagree with me, I think privacy is a basic human right. And this puts that human right at risk, right? So I think it raises all new issues that we need to address.
Yeah, I mean, it's complicated. I mean, I wanted to ask you some other questions, like if you get hold of the software, do you need the command and control infrastructure, or can, like the cartels, were they able to just do their own thing, like use the software for their own purposes without getting permission and whatnot?
The circumstances in Mexico are unique, let's put it that way. And you do need the command and control infrastructure, which, by the way, we have a class coming up in August on command and control infrastructure. So those people are interested in that. So, I mean, when you're going ahead and you're spying on somebody or you're trying to extract revenues from them, you need to have some way of exfiltrating the data off their phone or other devices. That requires a command and control infrastructure. And in this case, the Pegasus has a very complex command and control infrastructure that's very hard to detect. And all the transmissions are done and encrypted, making it more difficult to actually see and detect them. And in addition, if they feel that the target or law enforcement in that community has detected them, they can immediately delete the software. That's why it's become really, really hard to get samples of this software, because NSO deletes it, okay, as soon as they detect any kind. Like, for instance, if you go in and you start trying to detect the processes, and there's a number of processes, one of the interesting things about this software is that, and it's something that I teach my students too, is that if you're going to create a malicious process, make it a process is something that runs in the background, a daemon, right? It's a process that runs in the background constantly. Give it a name that looks almost identical to a native process on that particular device, right? And it makes it really, really hard for the forensic analyst or whoever's doing the incident response to detect it. And that's what they did here. Almost all of the processes that are running on the iPhone have names that are almost identical to the names of native processes on those devices, making it really, really hard for anybody to be able to find them. Even people who have a lot of experience, it's hard to detect them. And I have to give a little bit of credit to the NSO people. I mean, they're a very talented group of developers, right? They spend days, weeks, months, years developing these. So that kind of raises an issue that you and I have talked about in the past, and that is that hacking can be a very time-consuming and tedious process. When you start talking about Zeroday, a company like NSO or the Equation Group or VuPen or Hacking Team, they can have really good developers working months and years to develop a Zeroday. And then, of course, they can sell it for millions of dollars, but they invest a lot of time in it. So, yes, you can take over systems in 30 seconds or less, like in the TikTok videos. But those are but those are only insecure systems, right? Those are insecure systems. When you're talking about secure systems, it becomes a lot more complex. And so my message to students and to viewers is that don't get frustrated and don't expect that you can exploit everything in 30 seconds or less. You can exploit insecure systems in 30 seconds or less, but that's not going to necessarily apply to a secure system, right? Like a new iPhone, right? That could take you years to develop a Zeroday and a lot of knowledge and skill and resources to do that. And these companies like NSO do that. And the NSA in the United States and the Equation Group in the US and a number of other companies and entities around the world are doing it. But most of the time, when you see a big hack, it often has an element of social engineering involved in it. The successful ones, even here, we were talking about the Pegasus, it required some social engineering. So we go back and we look at the one click, right? These were social engineering attacks. There was somebody sending a message who knew something about the person that would get them to click on a link. Right? So even when we're talking about the most sophisticated hacking in the world, it still has an element of social engineering. And that's why I always tell my people is that you should not overlook social engineering. If NSO Group has to have an element of social engineering, then you probably do too. Or for that matter, whether it be the Russian FSB, GRU, I mean, they all use social engineering. So don't feel like that's a lower level of hacking, because even the most sophisticated hackers in the world use elements of social engineering to get what they need. Now, it's a lot easier to hack a system when you can entice the user into an action. If you can entice the user into an action, social engineer, it's a lot easier to take over whatever device it is. And that's the case here with the NSO Group's Pegasus. It applies to, if you look at all of the major hacks, and that's one of the reasons why, I emphasize the history of hacking in my book, Getting Started Becoming a Master Hacker, because on almost all of the major hacks, if you look at all the big ones, there's a social engineering aspect of it, right? And so we're talking about the major hacks in history. Very few of them did not have a social engineering element. Even, Stuxnet had to find a way into that facility because it was basically an air gap facility. It required some social engineering to get probably the most sophisticated piece of malware ever developed into that uranium enrichment facility. Here, initial Pegasus required at least the user click on a link. The more recent ones have ZeroClick. Eternal Blue is a good example of a ZeroClick exploit. So Eternal Blue, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, is an exploit that was developed by the Equation Group for the NSA, and basically it exploited SMB on server message block protocol. And it's on almost every machine, every Windows machine. It's on every Linux machine as well. An implementation of it is. And it exploited SMB to basically take over the system, and it required no interaction by the user. This is rare. This is very rare. Now, in the 90s, it wasn't rare, right? or in the early years of the 21st century, but in a more secure world that we're working in 2023, it's very, very rare that you can develop a piece of malware that requires no user interaction. And if you are, you're going to spend many, many person hours and years being able to develop it. There are some pieces of the early versions of the iOS Pegasus out there and available for analysis. The class that we're doing in October is an Android, so we'll be looking at a number of pieces of Android malware, including the Pegasus version of Android. And the Android version goes by a slightly different name. But yeah, they call it Khashoggi, which is the twin brother of Pegasus. There's been a lot less research done on the Android version of Pegasus, and so it might be a lot more prevalent than we know. What most of the research has been done is on the iPhone version of Pegasus, because it was originally discovered in the phone of a human rights activist in Bahrain, I think in 2016. And so Amnesty International has focused a lot of their research on the iOS version of Pegasus. And there's been a lot less research that's been done on the Android version. So it might be all over the place, and we just don't know.
So Occupy the Web, obviously, because this is YouTube, we have to be really careful what we show. Thanks so much for showing a slide of the actual part of the code that was a problem. You said that you've got a class coming up in October, right, where you're going to look at the Android version, and you've actually got the software and you'll go through that, right?
Yes, we have the Android version of Pegasus, known as Khashoggi. And but I always say simply the Android version of Pegasus, and we'll be analyzing it as well as other Android malware and we're just focusing in this class on Android.
That's great. I mean, so I know people who are watching are going to want to see the code, but yeah, this is YouTube, so we've got to be really careful. So if you really want to, see it actually working, and have Occupy the Web explain it to you and show you other malware, then sign up for his class. I put links below. Occupy the Web, I really want to thank you for sharing your knowledge. I always say this, I mean, like I said in the beginning, your books are amazing. You have an amazing ability to explain complex stuff simply. And I thank you thanks so much for coming on YouTube and, just sharing the knowledge. We've done a lot of videos together, and I appreciate you doing that and look forward to the next ones.
Thanks, David. I always enjoy being on your show, and I'm looking forward to doing a little more technical one on the Eternal Blue exploit in the near future.
Yeah, just so for everyone who's watching, the idea there is you're going to do a demo, right, with Windows 10 or something and show us how it actually works.
Right. It was originally developed for Windows 7, but it's been reported for Windows 8 and Windows 10, and it works against those versions under certain circumstances, like everything. There has to be certain circumstances, and it's actually a overwrite of two buffers between SMB1 and SMB2. So in the cases where a machine has both of those versions on it, it will work.
So that's great. So for everyone who's watching, please put in the comments below other topics that you want us to cover. If there's anything that you think will be great, put in the comments below. I read a lot of the comments, and Occupy the Web and I discuss those and see what would be interesting to cover. Occupy the Web, thanks.
Thanks, David. See you again soon.